Hello, all. Today I'd like to talk briefly about St. John's Episcopal Church in Richmond, Virginia. As you can see behind me here in this lovely photo from courtesy of architecturerichmond.com. This church is best known as the location where Patrick Henry gave his famous Liberty or Death speech during the Second Virginia Convention in March of 1775. Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Richard Henry Lee, and other famous revolutionary leaders were present for this convention. The convention voted to have Virginia establish a militia and place it in a position of defense. This was in reaction to Lord Dunmore dissolving the General Assembly the previous year, removing Virginia's legal authority to organize for self-defense. It also appointed delegates to the Second Continental Congress. Now, St. John's has remained an active Episcopal parish with worship services every Sunday. It also serves as a living museum, providing both tours and historical reenactments to visitors. And now, while there's no charge to attend a church service, tickets are required to be purchased for tours and reenactments. The money from the tickets goes towards site preservation. Preservation is also funded through donations and grants. And the church currently has several preservation projects underway. And on the website, you can see a list of both current and completed projects across the years. The largest of the projects was a roof replacement that was conducted back in 2015. And obviously, much of the site preservation goes towards keeping the building in good condition, considering it's an active parish and it's an over 250-year-old building. The smallest of the preservation projects is probably the Adopt a Grave program that allows individuals to finance the restoration of gravestones in the church cemetery. The church has remained an active parish throughout the centuries, and upkeep was traditionally overseen by the parish. However, that changed in 1938 with the St. John's Foundation being established to take care of the historical upkeep of the church and its grounds. And this happened because the project just became too much of a burden on the parish itself. Also, around that time, St. John's was designated as a historic district by the city of Richmond. Now, as far as historical interpretation goes, there's actually a very interesting deviation between the interpretation given by the St. John's Foundation and that given by the church itself. There are two different websites that exist. There's the church's actual website, and one would go to that to look up service times or for parishioners to get information about the church. And then there's a St. John's Foundation website, which goes into St. John's public history. It's where you can get information about tickets, tours, where you can buy tickets, etc. And when you look at the St. John's Foundation website, you can really get a sense for the excitement of the events of 1775. One of the first things a visitor to the website will see is Henry's famous give me liberty or give me death emblazoned across the front of the website. There are also pictures of tours and reenactments. There are pictures of historical reenactors in their colonial garb, in the middle of giving speeches, and it really gives a visitor an idea of the drama, excitement, and the weight of the occasion. Now, if you go to the church's website, it does have a section you can go to get information on the history of the church. And it does talk about the events of the Second Virginia Convention. However, the visitor won't see the details of the Second Virginia Convention until about halfway down the page. In fact, the first thing a visitor will see is a land acknowledgement mentioning those who lived on and owned the land in the past. They mention several Native American tribes. Ironically, the British and Confederates aren't mentioned, even though they own the land at some point. Different points throughout history. So the interpretation of St. John's history here on the church's website conveys more of an embarrassment for existing as opposed to an attempt to recapture the energy of 1775. Now, it makes sense that the St. John's Foundation doesn't include a land acknowledgement because it doesn't do a very good job of selling tickets. However, with the liberal slant of the Episcopal Church, I guess it makes sense that you'd have a land acknowledgement on the church's website, since the types of people who are generally interested in attending a church service are going to be more liberal, and they would probably like seeing that. However, it doesn't do a good job of selling tickets, like I said. Nevertheless, St. John's is still a historically significant part of our nation's history, and going to get a tour or scene reenactment, I think, would be a very interesting thing to do and something I would like to do in the future, and I would recommend to others.